It's so good to be with you today, and thank you, Sarah, for the nice introduction. Pastor Josh, a few weeks ago, he said, would you like to do one of the passages in the Matthew 18 series? And he gave me verses 10 through 14, which is the story of the lost sheep. And so I said, sure. And I was excited about it, and it got me back in touch with the parables. And I'm going to share with you from Donovan Flanagan some of the thoughts here on the lost sheep and what it means to be lost. And I thought about Donovan Flanagan. If you said that about 10 times as fast as you could, you'd be in trouble. But anyway, I want to give him credit for some of the things that I'm going to share today. And as I thought about Jesus, we'll be looking at Luke 15, 1 through 7 here in just a moment. When we read the parables of Jesus, they're not just stories, but so much more. And we recognize, if we're honest, that Jesus is the most incredible communicator who ever walked on the earth. The impact of his words some 2,000 years later still resonates with us today in this service. And they were written down so that we might know them, that we might be able to apply them to our life, and use them to understand and remember them and communicate a story that we can never forget. The parables resonate with us. And if we remember the story, it leads to the principles of that story and the characters involved in it to remember the teaching of that story. It's a simple process of helping us to understand a spiritual truth. So in Luke chapter 15, 1 through 7, now the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to him, and the Pharisees and the scribes grumbled, saying, "This man receives sinners and eats with them." So he told them this parable. "What man of you, having 100 sheep, if he has a lost one of them, does not leave the 99 in the open country and go after the one that is lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders, carries it rejoicing. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and his neighbors, saying to them, 'Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep that was lost.' Just so I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over the 99 righteous persons who need no repentance." In this story, it is a beautiful story about the word lost. And the story here is about being lost and what it means to be lost. Jesus tells us in this chapter 15, there's 3 stories of lost things. There's a lost coin or silver. And then the prodigal son, there's the lost son who has gone into the far country and has squandered everything and desires to return home. But in this parable, we're going to pick up one of the most powerful illustrations of who Jesus is, who the shepherd is, and who we are as the lost. At the beginning of the chapter, we're told that his story deals with the problem. The problem. There's always something when Jesus is dealing in scriptures, he's answering a spiritual question, and he's answering a situation that people are questioning him about, and he wants to teach them something about the principle of what the kingdom of God is like. And so we start out in this passage. We find out the problem here was the Pharisees were angry, quite angry. It said they grumbled because they were jealous of Jesus. And by the way, Alan's doing a wonderful job, Rickenbacker, if you don't go to a Connect group, about the shadow, about the one who has come. And so they were upset. All they knew was their way of life. And the indictment against him was that he was spending quality time with people that were beneath them. They weren't moral enough. They weren't religious enough. They weren't like them. And they didn't consider it good that Jesus was spending time with those who weren't in their realm. So in this parable, we have a sheep that has strayed from the flock. we can imagine that that lost lamb was simply doing what lambs do. Lambs simply go about grazing under the guard of the shepherd. And we most understand that the lambs must not be very old, unless you're big like me, you can pick up a big lamb, but it says the shepherd picked up the little lamb to bring home. And so this little lamb is doing what he does routinely, looking for new places to graze, until suddenly he is no longer could hear the voice of the one who was looking after him, and becomes lost in a hostile wilderness. And Jesus in this parable depicts himself as the shepherd, the one who goes after the lost, who seeks the lost, who loves the lost. And we find in John chapter 10 and 11, I am the good shepherd who gives life for the sheep. Hebrews chapter 13:20 calls him that great shepherd of the sheep. In 1 Peter 5:4, he is called the chief shepherd. He is the shepherd, the primary one. He's the Son of God who seeks after us, desires a relationship to rescue us in whatever condition we're in. But our most familiar passage of the shepherd is in the 23rd Psalm. And I would be amazed on this commentary how many school systems today a child has never even heard the 23rd Psalm before. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures, and he restores my soul. The Lord is my shepherd. The good shepherd recognized who was missing. And with the same concern a parent would have if you lost your child. One day, Joel went missing in our neighborhood in Oklahoma where we were at. And we were able to find him on his bike down with the other kids somewhere, and there's that panic. But I think most of us can relate even to a pet when something's lost. You know, our retriever's 7, he's going to be 7 years old. He's my best friend. And if he walks out that gate and he's lost, there's panic. You see signs up looking for this one who is lost. In fact, the other day I was in my house, I heard a knock. I didn't really catch it. And then I looked across the street, and one of my neighbors was going up to his neighbor's door, and he was knocking. The next thing I knew, I started to walk out. You know, I was going to have to put a few more clothes on to go out to greet him. Because I knew the neighbor, he's down around the corner. And he come up to the door, and I got prepared, and he knocked again, and I went out to greet him. He says, I'm looking for my cat. He had a cat that was partially, his wife didn't want the cat to live in the house, but the cat got to live in the basement during the night and would wander the rest of the time. He had that cat. And we can all sense that sense of loss when we are out of touch with someone who loves us. So in this story, Jesus is the shepherd, and in this story, and he's the shepherd in our story today. Wherever you're at, whatever's going on, he's the same shepherd in the story of the 23rd Psalm and in the lost lamb. And when we look at the condition of the sheep, it's easy to sum up the situation. And we've got things on television, the Lost, the series. Lost in Space was when I was a kid. If you're old enough to remember that, you're old. But they came out with a new series, I think, as far as a modern day. Not quite as good, but anyway. But it's summed up in one word, lost. It's a terrible word. There is no other word that is more tragic than that they are lost. See, it's tragic to be lost and alone, and have no idea how to navigate a hostile field, how to get back home, whether you can return home, and what is home. To be lost is to be separated from the flock, to be separated from the shepherd, to be separated from the protection of the shepherd and from the provision and the companionship of the fold of the lambs and the sheep. The sheep was lost. And that is when Jesus said, and one of the things, and I love reckless love because this is the message He comes seeking after us. In some ways, I wish we'd reversed it and had it at the end, more impact. No. But I want you to resonate with He comes seeking us. He seeks after us. He desires us. He cares about us. He cares about me. And that's what I'm primarily concerned about. No. He says He's come to seek and save which is lost. Luke 5:32 says, I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance, to a change in their life, a new hope in their life. Jesus didn't come to call the perfect. He came to call those who are lost. But Christ receives sinners, the outcasts, the people nobody else cares about. He sat with the sinners and influenced them. He didn't avoid them. That was the indictment against him. They called him a wine bibber because he sat with the sinners who weren't righteous, the ones who didn't match up. And we should never avoid people because we believe that they're morally beneath us. But even I put in this connotation today, and even when they're socially beneath us. I always called this place Brentwood Land. It's like Disney World. There's very few places like it. Very few places like it. If you have your parent, or you have parents that love you, one parent, whatever, you're blessed today. But those socially beneath us, walk a little bit around them. Not moral. Today it's not morals, but it's just they don't fit up and they don't fit into the crowd we want to be a part of. And so I think about Project Life and Helping Hands. Amazing about being lost. Helping Hands, they had a pushing that as part of the church, as far as that ministry the church supports. But Helping Hands came about a few years ago. And they found out that in Tennessee, in fact, Kathy just told me about a movie that Mark Wahlberg did, that they showed up at the house of a child that would be taken out of the home with a large garbage bag, where a child who was being taken from the home because of the abuse or something or the neglect of someone in their family, and they would put their belongings in that bag, in that trash bag, and pull them out maybe in the middle of the night. You know what lost is? It's when you're 10 years old and your whole world collapses around you. And you feel like that nobody cares. Nobody loves you. And so what Helping Hands did, they went out and they've purchased and they've given out now maybe 5,000 or 7,000 duffel bags. They started out in Middle Tennessee and Nashville, and now the whole state wants it. And the fundraiser is to pay for nice duffel bags that the social workers can now take with them to go to a home when they take a child out of that home. And now they're also putting in toiletries and things. Because do you understand in America today, 80% of the men and women who are in prison today were in foster care at some time. They were lost and nobody cared. And so that's just a little bit of comment there that all of us have faced those times. And so, if we're all honest, we aren't better than anybody else. We're all equal at the foot of the cross. I can't look down my nose toward anybody, no matter how low they are. Now, I will say this about some narcissists and stuff. There are people you need to stay away from. They're dangerous. And if you had to live in that, you understand what I'm saying. Now, well, they're all redeemable. They may be, but you don't need to try to redeem them. Get away. That's free today. But if we're honest, we recognize at one time we all are lost. And some of us feel lost even now. It should remind us of where we once were lost sheep, alone and separated from joy, separated with purpose. off in a room, confused, and I think of young people today with all the stuff they're bombarded with of who they are sexually, every kind of thing, and they're stuck in their rooms with their phones or whatever else, trying to find peace of mind and wondering, does anybody care about me? And that's the commission of the church and the commission we've been given, that we care. We don't do a very good job of it, but we do our best to care and show the love of Jesus to people. So it begs the question, what does it mean to be lost? Some people say in our society, don't even use the word sinner, don't ever do that. Don't give any condemnation of my lifestyle, that I need to change anything. But being lost means that you're living your life in your own power, looking to live life in a way that brings you satisfaction, but to live in your power and strength. But the truth is, your whole life is separated from God, apart from His watchful care, His provision, and His protection. Can you imagine the moment the lamb heard the shepherd calling his name? I don't think he would have been called Frank or Joe or Paul. But can you imagine what he knew? And that lamb out there was lost. And he heard his name being called by someone he knew loved him and cared for him. See, we all have a name. And there's nothing like God knowing your name and calling you to come home. So today, Jesus is searching for you. His grace is searching for you. His mercy and forgiveness is searching for you. And we all at some point, we are like that lost sheep where we go astray so many times. For some of our situations, our burdens, our foolishness, our recklessness, and decision-making caused us to run from God. The prodigal son, which he does, and many of us have heard that story so many times, but the prodigal son who became lost, he took his father's inheritance and asked for it before his father had died. He disgraced his father, and his father gave the inheritance. And the story of this lost one, he goes into a far country and he squanders his wealth. I'd like to see Gates or any of them be able to squander their wealth, but anyway. I don't know how much money he gave him, but he had lots of money, and he squandered all of it. And he woke up in a far country, isolated and alone and separated and lost, and didn't know where to turn. And finally, an aha moment said, well, my father has servants at home. He was eating the pods of the pigs in the hog pen. He was so hungry. He was lost. But hear this, no one's too lost that can't be saved and redeemed. And so he made a decision, I'll go home to my father. At least he has servants, and I'll just come in. I know that I've disgraced him, but hopefully my father will take me back, and I can be a hired man. And at least I will be able to eat. And of course, that story is when the son comes, the father runs and embraces him and welcomes him home. That's the grace of God that says, welcome home. I've been looking for you. I've been seeking for you. All that stuff going on in your life, that confusion. And you know, this doesn't fit everybody. This message might not hit everybody. You say you're doing fine without God, whatever, and there's all sorts of excuses. But for some of you, it'll speak to your heart that says, Jesus says, I love you. And you'll say, well, I don't know. And I could do that at times myself, but I only know this. Jesus has never, ever let me down when I've turned and said, Lord, forgive me. And so as he sees this, so a lot of us, as we think about, we feel shame and guilt that we don't deserve to be in the embrace of God. We've done certain things, but despite our shortcomings, Jesus never says good riddance. Bye-bye, you struck out, you did it enough times, you can never be forgiven again. That's the good news of grace. No, the Bible tells us Jesus chases after us And we have to do everything that we can to run and to avoid his voice. That's why we have so much noise going on the time and so much activity, because we don't want to slow up long enough to really contemplate what our life is really going on. And we hide our pain through the drugs and all those sorts of things because we're afraid to turn loose, to come home. He goes, and his story, as we look at it, it tells us Jesus chases after us. He leaves the 99 to go and to find the one. And once he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders. You know, with 100 sheep, probably there was more than one shepherd. There's probably several shepherds. But in this story, it was probably the owner of that little sheep that went after him. It says, heaven rejoices. They celebrate that you returned home and turned away from the things that you're separating you. So this whole story is about the goal of Christ coming to restore us, looking for us. This story is the story, this is the love of Jesus that he has for the lost that we can learn from. This is our God. This is Jesus, the Good Shepherd. And if you've ever felt lost in the middle of a crowd or like you're just a number, I hope you take heart today that you're more than a number. You're more than just anything else, that you're special in the eyes of God. And he comes seeking you. That's the story of all the gospel. He comes seeking to save that which is lost. I hope you understand the great value. And you say, well, I don't feel much value. I'm sorry. You know, there's a condition, a lot of us in our lives, we can have empathy for others and feel for them, but for ourselves, we can't have empathy because we feel like we have blown it and we're not worthy. See, you understand the great value you are to God, that he would write a story about us to remind us that even if one sheep, you, I, me, whatever English that is, that he wrote a story to remind us that he will go after the one lost sheep. He will leave the whole world of people that are safe, already saved, and go into a desert. Wandering in the desert, he will go looking to search for you and me. You know, I thought about one time what the shepherd does. And years ago, I think Pastor Josh was back there somewhere and still a youth pastor, and a question came up about a family that was coming. And the mother was coming to church, and there was 4 children or 3 kids that were halfway grown, and the father was not coming, and he was supposedly Christian. And I don't know, I can't remember. I may have the details wrong. Forgive me if I got them wrong. But anyway, some of the staff members said, well, the dad's not coming. And I made a point to them. I said, I can get him to come. And the reason I knew I could, at least I had about a 95% chance. See, when I was in Oklahoma, I got ready to leave Oklahoma, and Jerry Fields, when I got ready to leave after 10 years, he says, I hate to see you leave. But every time I'd go call on Jerry, he'd come to church. And I said, Jerry, if you'd shown up a few more times, I'd probably still be in Oklahoma. So I knew he was at a bargain lot or something down in Franklin, just to prove a point. So I went down to Franklin, and I walked in, and he was busy, made sure I kind of sat in the background. And I just said, I'm Pastor Paul, and I'd just like to meet you. I did that once, maybe did that twice. Now, I just didn't do it for him. I've done it for others at the time, okay? But he came to church for a while. Got him here. I can't guarantee what will happen. But that's what the Good Shepherd does. And that's what Jesus wants for us. So the good news is that when we feel disconnected, when Jesus shares the parable of the lost sheep, he's pointing out his role in our lives as a shepherd who loves us. The good news is that no matter how often we fail, how many mistakes we make, and as in Alan's class there this morning, I got to sit in for just a few minutes. How many times have I wandered into the desert? Every day. How many times have I been lost? How many times do I need God to receive me back home? every day, generally. So when something happens to us and we're in that place, He loves us. And no matter how much we failed, the mistakes we've made, the sins we've committed, and we feel separated and alone, the voice of the shepherd is always calling us by name to come home. Our journey in life is never in a straight line, and it is a life filled with mystery. I never lose the sense of mystery because no one can predict the future or know what's going to happen a moment after this. And it's a great truth of the divine mystery of God that we have been chosen before the foundation of the world, that the Father and the Son, who created the heavens and the earth, chose us before the time of creation. And we're pursued by the one who loves us more than we love ourselves. And a good shepherd who will never leave us or forsake us. So whenever we're alone, we can learn to listen for that voice who is always calling us.